Hello, and welcome to the Badhumanist look at Arcane Mage. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Arcane Mage and how it is playing currently on the BfA beta. I'm going to go through all of the passive and the abilities, looking of course at their utility, the base set, base toolkits, talking then about the talents, what synergies it might have between them, usefulness, how they compete in their row. I'll show off a couple of the AoE abilities as well in that time. Talk about stats. Not looking for what stats are better or worse per se, but more just about any synergy the stat might have with the spec or the playstyle. And I'm going to wrap it up with a summary where I give my overall thoughts and kind of hopes or maybe wishes for the spec in the future. So of course, let's start off with our passives. So our mastery here is Savant. It increases your mana regeneration and it increases the amount of damage done by your arcane charges. So again, the more arcane charge you have, the more that the damage of Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage do. And again, your mastery's levels scale that up. It also, like I said, increases your maximum mana as well as your mana regen. Clear Casting is your other passive, so for every 100 mana you spend, you gain a 1% chance to gain Clear Casting, making your next Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion free. Now down to abilities. Time Warp is still here. Same thing as before, it's basically your hero. Bloodlust, Teleport. Supernova here is a talent. I'll actually show that off later on. Spellsteal, still here. Slowfall, slow. Winter Power's a talent. Ring of Frost a talent. Remove Curse. Prismatic Barrier is your shield. Again, it looks like this. It basically absorbs damage for you, of course. It also reduces the amount of damage you take. It can also reduce the duration of magical harmful effects, so it basically dots on you. Presence of Mind is a 1 minute cooldown. It is off the GCD, and it causes your next 2 Arcane Blast to be instant. You have your portals. Polymorph, another type of the talent. Ice Block is still here. You can see that. Great Invisibility, again, also still here as well. There we go. Go invisible. Frost Nova. Evocation is one of your main abilities here, so it increases your mana regenerate by 750% for 6 seconds. Displacement, so again, this teleports you back to wherever you last blinked to. So if I was to blink, I could then displace back, like so. Counterspell is still here. Conjure Refreshment, so here, blink as I showed you. Arcane Powers remain cooldown, 1.5 minute cooldown, 10 seconds you deal 30% more spell damage, and your spells cost 30% less mana. Arcane Arrows a talent. We have Arcane Missiles, again launches 5 waves of missiles at the enemy over 2 seconds. It is a channel. The channel is reduced by haste, so again the more haste you have, the less the duration the channel is, but you still always get 5 attacks out, causing a total of X arcane damage. You do have Arcane Intellect now, which again increases your intellect by 10%. It is a raid buff. Arcane Familiar is a talent that'll show up in a second. Arcane Explosion, again, causes an explosion of magic around the caster, dealing X arcane damage to all enemies within 10 yards. Arcane Blast is your main ability here. Blast a target for arcane damage. Each arcane charge increases the damage, the mana cost, and reduces the cast time. And again, this amount scales with your mastery. Arcane Barrage launches bolts of arcane energy at the target, causing X damage. Again, this also scales with mastery with the charges you have. It also consumes all of your arcane charges. So if you're at 4 and you use this, it'll do a bunch of damage, but then clear those charges back. Alright. Speaking of talents, let's take a look at these. So 15 row, we have Rule of 3s. So whenever you gain your 3rd arcane charge, the cost of your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Missiles is reduced by 100%. I'll show this off in a second. Amplification. When clear cast, Arcane Missiles fires 1 additional missile. That's very nice. Arcane Familiar. Again, we can show you off this right here. It basically summons a little dude over here next to you. And it also increases your maximum mana by 10%. Now the damage it does is very, very, very small. So more than likely, that's not the best option right now. 30 row, you have Mana Shield. This basically buffs your barrier. You have Shimmer, which again buffs your blink, and you have Slipstream, which allows clear casting to cause arcane missiles to be channeled while moving, and it also allows evocation to be channeled while moving as well. So that kind of adds the mobility of the spec, which is nice. 45 row, I think is a very interesting row here, to be honest with you. You have Rune of Power. Now, it should be noted that the Arcane Mage is still very similar to how it was in Legion. It's still a burn and conserve playstyle, and you would think Rune of Power would feel great, because again, when you're burning, you put them down, you get all your burns off, you would probably actually use both of them in a row, get like 20 seconds worth of 40% increased damage, and then you would conserve, and while you conserve, you can get back both those charges. Seems like it'd be great. However, because Rune of Power is on the GCD, and Arcane Power is also on the GCD, and they both only have 10-second durations, no matter which one you choose to use first, you're going to be cutting into its time. And I would honestly say you're better off cutting into Rune of Power's time than you are cutting into Arcane Power, because again, the reduction of the mana cost for Arcane Blast is very, very important. So you're probably going to Rune of Power, then Arcane Power, but again, that does mean you're going to be eating up, 1.2 or basically a GCD of your time just casting that, which doesn't feel the best. Mirror Images creates 3 copies of you. It basically just cast Arcane Blast, does good damage on a 2-minute cooldown. Incanter's Flow is the other option here. So magical energy flows through you while in combat, building up to 20% increased damage and then diminishing down to 4. How this basically works is when you start attacking, you'll get 1 stack and you get 4% increase. Every about 2 seconds, it then increases. So it then go to 8%, then 12%, then 16%, and then 20%. It then will actually stay there for a little while, basically like 4 seconds, and then start counting back down. So you get the 2 seconds of the 10, you get another 2 of the 10, and then it goes 2 at 16, 2 at 12, 2 at 8, 2 at 4, another 2 at 4, and then starts counting back up. In the end, this will average up to a 12% increased damage, right? So if you kind of average out the buff across the entire fight, it should average out to be around 12-ish percent. 60 row, you have Renaissance. So Arcane Barrage deals 50% increased damage per target hit. So again, in AoE situations, that's very nice. Charged Up, good talent here as well. It immediately grants you 4 charges, 4 Arcane charges every 40 seconds. And the last one, Supernova, I'll actually show that off right now. There we go. Right, so big boom there. So pulses arcane energy around the target, enemy, or ally, dealing a bunch of arcane damage to all enemies within 8 yards, knocking them upward. The primary enemy will take 100% more damage. Now, we'll have to see how this gets played out, because in general, most people do not like when things get knocked around. So again, many people have been yelled at for knocking things around and mythic pluses and such, so we'll have to see if this gets any play or not. 75 row, we have Chrono Shift, so your Arcane Barrage slows enemies by 50% and increases your movement speed by 50% for 5 seconds, so again, adding mobility there. Ice Ward just gives your Frost Nova 2 charges here. And Ring of Frost, again, same as before, you cast it, it goes up. If anything's in that ring, it gets frozen. Anything enters the ring or leaves the ring, we get frozen as well. Row, we have Erosion, so your attacks erode the target resistance. It basically gives you up to 8% increased damage to that target. Now, after 3 seconds of not taking damage, it does start ticking down. That will occur with evocation. So the fact that you have to evocate does mean you probably get some reduction of the stacks there, but it only decreases by 1% every second. So in the end, you're going to still get around 8% from that, which is quite nice. You have Unstable Magic, so this just basically causes Arcane Blast to deal an extra explosion afterwards. It does, by the way, count as its own ability on damage meter. So again, Unstable Magic will be its own ability on damage meters there. Another Tempest is the other choice here. I can again show that one off as well. There we go. So again, it does this little thing, bouncing around, doing damage to nearby targets. Combat. So the 100 row here has Overpowered. So Arcane Power, instead of having a 30% and 30%, will now have 60% increased damage and 60% reduced mana cost. Temporal Flux is a 5 seconds after Evocate ends, you gain its effect again, and then you have Arcane Orb, which again I can show off here. It actually is pretty cool. And there you go. Every target it hits, you gain a charge. You also gain one when you cast it towards end cooldown. So that's your kit. Now, I will say that the base toolkit, even with talents, is pretty simplistic, right? You have Arcane Blast, you have your Arcane Barrage, and you have Arcane Missiles as your main single target damage abilities. AoE, yes, you can definitely talent into some other things. But for the most part, you end up with just those abilities. You then have 2 cooldowns for the most part. You have Arcane Power and Evocation. If you take Rune of Power, you'll have that as well. Again, presence of mind, because it's off the GCD, will probably end up getting macroed into something. I have it currently macroed into Arcane Blast. I'm not saying it's probably the best idea, but you probably just macro it into something. It's very much a passive thing you're not worried too much about. And again, I also took Charge Up here, which again gives you another ability. But in general, as far as damaging abilities, it's still simply this 3. But even with only 3 buttons, it still feels quite engaging. Now, I'm going to show you about the Rune of Power. And again, like I said, it might end up being the best way to play, right? It might be that even with the fact that you're kind of wasting a couple seconds of that having the GCD of Arcane Power, it's still worthwhile. But let's build up to 4. Let's get this going. Alright, I'm going to Rune of Power, Arcane Power, and then start my blasting. So this is the Arcane Mage. You're basically going to blast all the way down, channel through here, and then you're going to just simply keep on blasting your way down till you get low on mana. Now, I'll talk about this later, but I'm actually questioning whether or not you actually would want to Arcane Missile while the burn, and I'll explain why you might not want to here in a bit. Again, I should have Rune of Powered again, but when you get low on mana, you will then evocate yourself back up, and then just start your burn again. Now, here you'd want to start conserving, because again, you want to make sure you have mana when you have Arcane Power. So you would simply just be conserving at this point in time. Now, one thing I should notice as well is that you'll see that anytime I gain the 3rd charge, so right here, you see that I gain Rule of 3. So again, anytime you gain that 3rd charge, you get a free Arcane Blast afterwards, which again can be very nice for this kind of, keeping your mana up. Now, the min-maxing of the spec will probably come down to how many Arcane Blasts you do before clearing the stacks during your conserve phase. Again, is it going to be 4? Is it going to be 5? Is it going to be 6? I'm not honestly sure, but that really is going to end up being the key here. So again, one of the nice things to note is when you charge up, you automatically gain the Rule of 3s as well. So even though you're going to 4 charges, you actually gain that buff as well. Now, you can clearly see I'm not playing this to the best of my ability. I'm just simply trying to show off the basic idea here, the basic kind of toolkit, what the playstyle is going to be like. That being said, when I did play right in my testing, I did find that it did quite competitive damage, in fact. It has obviously really, really strong burst off the pull. Again, you can, like I said, double up Rune of Power with Arcane Power, and you can start with charged up with 4 charges, and you can just go right to town with Arcane Blast, and it feels really, really good. If you don't take this, you'll want to wait on Arcane Power until you have 4 charges, because the whole point is to reduce the mana cost, as well as the damage, of course. So that's one of those things where you're going to definitely want to be waiting on that. Now, like I mentioned, because Rune of Power ends up getting wasted a bit by this, it is possible that something like Incanter's Flow might be better. I'm also going to show off Temporal Flux here. So again, this is 5 seconds after evocation ends, you gain its effect again. Now, the real nice benefit of this is that the second time you gain the benefit, you don't have to channel. So you'll notice when I channel the first time, if I use any abilities, the channel will stop. And I'll actually cut off the channel a little bit early this time. And then you'll just see after 5 seconds, it kind of comes back again. Maybe this time I can do it a little bit better. Now, I don't have Rune of Power anymore, so I don't need to worry about that. So I'll just start right off with my Arcane Blasting. And you can see here that Incanter's Flow is up. You'll see it stacks up to 5 and then back down again. So again, I'm going to burn my way down to almost no mana. And then I will evocate. I'm going to cut it off early here, and you'll see that, here we go, Evoke happens again, and boom, I get my mana back. I can keep basically doing this the whole time, and now I can start my conserve. And so yeah, so that's the basic idea with Incanter's Flow. As I mentioned, I can charge up. I get a free Arcane Blast now at 4 stacks, which is quite nice. Give me one more, then clear it. So yeah, this is going to be your basic playstyle here with Arcane Mage. And as you can see, that time I did a lot better with my bursting there. But again, it really is going to come down to how many Arcane Blasts are you going to use before you end up clearing Arcane Barrage on the building phase. Is it going to be 4, 5, 6? I honestly don't know. I definitely think it's going to be more than 4. It will probably be 5 or 6 because, again, I found that if I only did 4 or 5, I didn't really lose any mana at all. So I just felt as if like I was wasting the mana in a sense, not using enough of those 4 charges. But again, we'll just have to kind of wait and see. So here it goes again. I can now start my burn once again. And I'll just burn all the way down to empty. And again, my idea here is that I want to basically run out of mana when Evocation comes off its cooldown. That's the idea here. Arcane Mist is kind of extended a little bit. Alright, so now I'm down. Evocate. Again, I'll just start my burn again. Now, again, I'm not quite sure with the Temporal Flux whether or not you're going to cut it off early like I did or let it go all the way up to the top and then just basically extend it at that point in time. So again, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work. Either way, I do feel like you end up wasting some of it. It does feel like, I will admit. So again, time will of course tell, and I'm sure better mages than I will figure out exactly how to min-max this spec. But I will say that that talent does feel to me as if it might be hard to kind of use all of the value, right? Because again, maybe if it was longer, maybe it was like after 10 seconds or something, it kind of sounds weird, but the fact that you could fill all the way up your mana on the evocation, you could then get 10 seconds to kind of burn again, basically the same length as your burn during Arcane Power, just burn again then, and then you get it filled up again, and then start your conserve phase. So again, it's one of those things where the 5 seconds just doesn't seem like enough time to burn enough mana. I normally only get down to about, I don't know, 70% mana or so in that amount of time. Again, I can only basically get off 4 Arcane Blasts in that time. So again, I'm only spending that much mana, and then I waste a good chunk of that second evocation but basically the effect. So again, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. But yeah, so this is the kind of play and engagement with the Arcane Mage. Now, speaking about stats here, in the past, versatility was a very, very good stat. It probably will still be. It just, again, it's just flat damage, which is always going to be very valuable. Mastery does it as well now, right? Mastery definitely is also going to be a kind of damage increase. Not only does it increase your mana regen and your maximum mana, allowing, of course, for longer burn phases, but it also, again, increases the damage of those Arcane Blasts and Arcane Barrages at higher stacks. And so basically you'll do more damage during the burn phase as well. So again, it's going to come down to the scaling, right? What scales better? You know, what's better, 100 verse or 100 mastery is going to be the idea here, and only time will tell. Haste, I think, is going to have some value. It might not be great, but it'll have some because you do have one ability that's reduced by haste, and then you also have these short windows. So if you take Rune of Power and you take Arcane Power, what you'll find is you have these very short windows to do a lot of damage, and the faster you can cast Arcane Blast, the better it's going to be. Now, one downside to haste is that the charges do reduce the cast time of your main casted ability. So it's one of those things where the haste kind of gets hurt a bit here because you don't get as much effect with that, right? Your base cast time at 4 charges is a lot lower, so haste can have less of an effect than it would on a longer cast time. It should be noted that haste also doesn't reduce, the channel time of Arcane Missile, so there's definitely some damage buff there as well with haste. Crit is crit. Again, it's just a random damage increase here or there. So yeah, I think that Verse and Mastery definitely are going to have direct effects. Haste will have some, Crit will probably have some as well. Time will, of course, tell what's going to be best. The last thing I want to talk about, again, as I mentioned, was Arcane Missiles. And going back to the way the spec plays, at zero charges, or even at one charge, I should say, you can see that Arcane Missiles is clearly a better ability. Okay, it does over 2 seconds. You get a total of 3725 arcane damage over that channel. Arcane Blast at 0 only does 820. Now, as you build up, it does more and more and more. Now, two things happen. The damage increases and the cast time decreases. So DPS is kind of scaling exponentially with charges, because not only do you get more damage per charge, but you reduce the cast time as well. Again, both of which would increase the DPS. With my math, at 4 stacks, Arcane Blast is a higher DPS ability at 110 in my gear with my stats than Arcane Missiles. If you take Amplification, which means when clear cast, which seems to be the main time you're casting Arcane Missiles, because then it's free, you get 1 additional missile. So that means that instead of shooting 5, it's shooting 6 missiles. And the same cast time happens, so again, DPS kind of goes up there, obviously, so you get 1 more missile out in the same amount of time. Even with that ability, they're about equal, right? A 4-stack Arcane Blast will be about the same, actually slightly a little bit more than Arcane Missiles. Now, Arcane Missiles being free and mana free might have a benefit because you're going to be regenerating mana in that time, which might, again, like I said before, allow you to kind of use more Arcane Blast in a burn phase before you get down to So you might still want to channel it anyway, but it's one of those things where it could be possible that when you're in your burn, right, when you are just sitting at 4 arcane charges, just channeling your Arcane Blast into the target, you might actually want to ignore Arcane Missiles. And we've seen this in the past. Outlaw Rogue had a case with Quick Draw in Legion where you get a Quick Draw proc and it'd be a DPS decrease to use it. And it might be the same kind of thing for some times in Arcane. Now again, at 120 with different scaling, these could be very different. Because again, they both scale differently with different stats, so again, that might not be the case. And I hope it's not the case, right? What I will say, and this can kind of lead me into my hopes and wishes for the spec, is that that's not the case. I don't like it when a class has a proc and you don't get to use it, or you don't want to use it, or you're punished for using it. That just feels bad. So, yeah, I really do hope that it turns out that I'm wrong, and that Arcane Missiles is always good to use on Clearcast. That would be lovely. Other than that, again, I think the spec is very good, and I think it's a great example of a spec that has few buttons, relatively simplistic but still engaging. I got some feedback on my Beastmaster video about some people saying that I was criticizing Beastmaster for being boring, and they liked the fact that it only had about 3 abilities. Well, here's a spec that has 3 abilities for the most part, but isn't boring. I'm not criticizing it. And the reason is because I feel as if, even though it's relatively simple, there's a lot of fine-tuning that can happen. There's a lot of min-maxing that can occur. Like I mentioned, how many Arcane Blasts are you going to use in your conserve phase before you clear your stacks? Because the more you can use before you clear, the more damage you'll be doing, because the more 4-stack Arcane Blasts you'll be doing. So there's a lot of fine-tuning, there's a lot of play differences. Their cooldowns feel empowering, or you really are playing around your cooldowns, and that feels engaging as well. You have this kind of cycle you're going through. So again, I found it to be very engaging. Now, it's not nearly as mobile as BM in that regard, but it's still mobile. You have the ability with Slipstream to be able to, evocate and move, right? That can absolutely happen. And if you get a clear casting, you can channel Arcane Missiles and move. So Arcane Barrage is instant, and Arcane Blast at 4 stacks, when you really care about it the most, is 1.2 seconds. And then that will be reduced by haste. So it's still a very mobile spec. You can get a blast off, move a little bit, blast off, kind of move a little bit. So you're going to have movement. You're going to be fine in that regard. So I really like this spec. I think it's a great example of how you can have a simpler spec, just having less buttons, less complicated spec, and yet still feel engaging, still feel as if you're rewarding players for playing the spec right. And that's, I think, a very important thing for Blizzard and WoW to be doing. Let me know what you think. Do you agree with me about my thoughts on Arcane Mage? Do you disagree with my thoughts on Arcane Mage? Are you going to play Arcane Mage? I would love to know. My hope is that in BfA you can play different different specs more frequently, right? You don't have to worry about just picking one and only playing one the entire expansion, but you can actually play a little bit of Arcane, maybe in on rating, and then maybe a little bit of fire, mythic plus, and maybe frost and PvP, and your gear can be relatively competitive. So we'll see how that happens. So let me know what you think about this spec down in the comments section. Again, if you liked my video, give me a like. If you disliked it, give me a dislike. I'm going to be doing the Fire and Frost Mages videos up next, so hopefully I will see you in those videos later.